Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range technical forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided by perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. I want to start you off with an infrared satellite animation here from last night's storms that moved through parts of Texas and Oklahoma. One of those supercells, the one you see going right there just north of the Red River Valley, was quite powerful and long duration in its life cycle here. These storms early this morning on Wednesday through midday are now pushing back into parts of northern and eastern Oklahoma, but in the overnight hours, some of these storms dropped some very large hail. This next map I'm showing you here looks at the last 24 hours of maximum estimated hail size, and zooming in there on parts of Texas and Oklahoma, we can see that that southern storm in through here was producing, as you match it up over there on the color bar, some extremely large hail. And I want to thank Michael Armstrong for sending these pictures out on Twitter for us to have a look at here of some of the hail in that southern storm there. You can see some of this is getting to be baseball to softball size hailstones. So a pretty nasty night, and it's still going throughout the day today in that same area. As we look forward throughout the rest of the day on Wednesday, our main severe weather target is shifting to the east of where it was last night, and we're setting up over parts of eastern Oklahoma and Texas, getting into Arkansas, Louisiana, and into Mississippi. And as we talked about in Monday's update, that threat was going to transition here over toward the south and east, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, under the gun tomorrow for more severe weather as this wave slides through the southern part of the United States. So I just want to give you that quick update on the near-term severe weather threat. And what I want to do now is I want to put the rest of this forecast video into perspective by showing you this map. So I was very curious about how often it rained from April 15th to May 15th when looking back over the last 40 years. So the number, and therefore the color coding that you see on this map, represents the average number of days from April 15 to May 15 where we accumulate better than 1/10 of an inch of rainfall. Now I'll just show you where I live, and just kind of as an example here, you can pick out your own spot. I'm right here in East Central Illinois. So on average, we have about 8 out of 31 days where we get precipitation greater than 1/10 of an inch. Now everybody watching this knows and understands that this does not mean that every 3 to 4 days it rains. That would be what we'd call climatology, but the way we get climatology isn't necessarily from very regular rainfall patterns. It tends to be more like 10 days without rain and then 6 days with rain. You know what I mean? So when you get this number, keep that in perspective overall. So you got your area picked out? Well, let me show you what we can compare this to. I think a lot of folks across the central ag belt, especially in the United States, would like to see a repeat of this same time period in 2018. So this is April 15th through May 15th, 2018, a repeat of 2018. Nobody wants a repeat of 2019. So when you look at this, notice where I live again, we only had 4 events, so less than half of what would be normal. 4 days out of that 31-day time period where we had better than 1/10 of an inch of rain, and planting progress was quick. Where it was wet was northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, southern Wisconsin, getting over into southern Michigan, then up here into parts of the Northeast. But much of the rest of the United States saw much less active pattern as we saw a deep trough build into Alaska and Greenland, and the jet stream flattened out into Canada, allowing for some warmth and some drier conditions. Now, the year we don't want to see a repeat of was last year. But look at how much different the numbers are. April 15 to May 15, total count of rainfall days better than 1/10 of an inch. Now, what this map doesn't show you is how heavy some of these rainfall events were, but you can see the trajectory of the heaviest precipitation events, cutting here across a big sector of where we grow a lot of crop in the United States. So with that as a backdrop, I want you to keep in mind as we pull through the rest of this forecast how the planting windows are going to open and how they're going to close, and what I think might be driving this overall pattern. Now, we certainly know that the 7 days leading up to today looked like this in terms of precipitation anomalies. We've had back-to-back weekends, and now the middle end of this week showing another round of severe weather for that region that's seen over the last week in some places over 600% of normal precipitation. But the rainfall that was in through here, including some snow, if you go back a week, that particular region has been relatively dry as of late as well, as has north, east, and south of there. Now, we're certainly filling this region in last night and into this morning, and that's not representative represented on this map. But still overall, with the cold weather a week ago and the drier weather since then, we're probably going to see a pretty big jump in planting opportunities in the central and western Corn Belt as conditions have been quite a bit more favorable. Now we're going to talk temperatures in just a few moments, but let's take this precipitation side of things and run with it. First of all, the storms as of noon today were pushing through parts of eastern Texas over to Arkansas and out of Oklahoma. And you can certainly see very, very active thunderstorms going on here. So as I switch over and we try to figure out when these planting windows close for some folks, let's look at some high resolution modeling first. Let's get this going and pause it right here early in the afternoon. So the severe weather to the south, all this into parts of Illinois, eastern Iowa, getting into southern Wisconsin, Michigan, northern Indiana, and Ohio, a lot of this was widely scattered light rainfall, okay? As we think about this window right in through here closing up for folks that are out running equipment today on Wednesday. This is 5 p.m. I've got it stopped right here at 5 p.m. As we pull this through, Missouri soaked, southern Illinois gets wet in the overnight hours. It seems as though by 10 p.m., maybe I-72 corridor right in through here over toward I-74 is going to close in the overnight hours. So you see by midnight into early tomorrow morning, that's when that all fills in with some wet conditions in through here. Meanwhile, this is the severe weather threat translating toward the east into early Thursday morning. So that pulls on through such that by 10 a.m. Thursday, this rain is going to kind of shut things down in this part of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, and into Kentucky as well. And this is going to pull through Ohio throughout the day on Thursday, really just chasing, I think, folks out of the fields here. So that pulls on through. And on the backside, we're watching our next round of scattered showers moving through the central part of the United States early Friday morning. And the question becomes, how frequent do these rainfall events show up? And when does the pattern adjust such that we start to get some drying out? Because through 7 p.m. on Friday evening, once again, we're hitting the same region, Oklahoma, Kansas, then getting into Missouri, Arkansas, and over into southern Illinois. And this system too pulls on to the east as we see widely scattered showers developing Friday evening in the north central plains. So from there, I want to show you a little bit different way of viewing this. And this is just the total accumulation of precipitation from this morning's ECMWF run. So let's watch it fill in. So as you see, moving through the day on Wednesday into Wednesday night and then eventually into early Thursday morning, that's the progression of the system we just saw moving through. So if we just work our way out into early Friday morning, you can see that there's going to be a broad sector of the Corn Belt that's going to have relatively drier conditions to keep working, but things are going to fill in after that. Now, out west, California, dry, but the Pacific Northwest does see light scattered precipitation as well. So let's go from Friday morning here into Friday afternoon and evening, now working our way into the overnight hours on Friday. You see, it's at that point that the next system pulls through parts of Missouri into Illinois and eventually into parts of Michigan, into parts of Indiana, Ohio, bringing in a soaking event there. And that's why when we work our way now out into next week, that area gets a closing down of, I think, the more active planting that we've been seeing this week. And that'll continue at least throughout the day today on Wednesday. But notice that during this time period, take a look at the central plains in through here. This is an area that is not necessarily overly wet. And I want to show you this compared right here, the European model for the next 7 days to what the GFS says. And if we just kind of go back and forth here, you notice that the GFS a little bit wetter in through this sector, but still overall general similar pattern. What's missing is the GFS kind of missed out on the heavy rains, I think, today in this sector. So what I did was I took these data and I made you a new kind of map out of it. And that map is going to kind of look at where the windows are going to be open and where they're going to close. And it looks something like this. So over the next 7 days, I was curious as to who was going to have more days or less days out of the next 7 with precipitation. So what I mapped here for you, look at the color bar. It goes from 1 to 7. And that would be the number of days from the GFS model, which is very similar right now, at least in magnitude or placement of precipitation as the European. And I said, how many days have more than 1/10 of an inch of rainfall? And so what we notice is that as we move forward, the windows are really going to tighten up in that corridor. Can you see it there? That's what I'm tending to see overall with the pattern evolving over the next 7 days. Question is, where do we go from there? So this is now the beginning of May. By the time we start May, we've been advertising this pattern in our forecast videos now for a little while. We see this deeper trough developing here in the Gulf of Alaska with ridging over the western United States. Now what this particular pattern means is that for the beginning of May, this is not a pattern that is conducive to big low pressure systems forming in the central United States. Instead, we tend to get clippers that come out of the north and west. They're going to dive into a trough that's going to come over here to the east and meet up with the subtropical branch of the jet stream, which I do believe is going to keep much of the east coast on the wetter side of things. But that ridge is going to split the country right here with who gets the warmth and who gets the cold. So we need to take this and understand where this pattern's leading us. Because into week 2, so this is now basically April 30th to May 6th, do notice that this is going over toward a slightly drier bias. Now I want to say it that way because I want you to remember, as I showed you earlier, we still get precipitation events. What this isn't giving us is these big barreling low pressure centers that run through here because the flow is coming in that direction. So when I show you that it's drier in that area I put this oval around, that does not mean no precipitation, just means it's drier than climatology would say for this time of year. Let's add to this some other model support. This is now the 9 to 11 day forecast from the GFS ensemble when attacked from an analog approach. We see that that same area, okay, is showing up with a drier bias, not completely dry, but it's on the drier side of things as we start the month of May. The question is, where does it go after that? So as we get into about May 7th, this is the current European ensemble's prediction of the flow pattern. And it's one that's got a bit of a split here across the west coast, which would lead over toward drier conditions, especially in California. But we've started to know the flow may be turning a bit, coming like this by May 7th. Now, if it does that, that is going to open up the Gulf of Mexico and rebound the moisture transport back into this section of the United States. And in spring, that would indicate more activity as we move into that week, by the end of May 7th, which is the end of the forecast time period. So what do we see May 4 through 7? Well, comparing our models, do you see how the European is returning normal precipitation in through this corridor? And so is the GFS, looking at the analog approach. So I look at that and I see a lot of similarities between what the GFS and its ensemble members are doing and what the European and its ensemble members are doing, and even looking at the analog approach. So we seem to be in this almost wave-like pattern to on again, off again with this precipitation. So let's take this and try to make some more sense out of it. I want to do that first with temperatures. Early this morning, we certainly saw very cold temperatures in parts of Michigan, northern Wisconsin, also getting into Ohio, Pennsylvania, even to West Virginia, where we had another frost event last night. But the resurging warmth is coming back up today into the midsection of the United States, and major temperature changes on some very windy conditions. Let's walk through the temperatures to see if we can anticipate, by looking at our minimum temperatures, more frost events. So we saw that this was the forecast for this morning, and it did a very good job. What I want to do is let's pause this and take a look over the next few days as to where the freezing temperatures are going to be. You want to be watching the numbers, okay? So this is now Thursday morning's low temperatures, getting into Friday. So a little bit of cooler air coming back into this section of the country on Friday. This is now Saturday. I see most of the freezing chances pretty far to the north here. See that with me? Working our way into Sunday's minimum temperatures and then into Monday. So there's a wave of cooler air moving through. At this point on Monday, it appears from the National Digital Forecast Database that the Eastern Corn Belt may skirt a frost event, but it would be in parts of central Michigan, northern half of Wisconsin, and this part of Minnesota. After that on Monday, getting into now Tuesday and Wednesday, we really see that the pattern here is favoring broader ridge here, trough tucked away into the northeast. And we can see that in our temperature patterns when looking here at those days kind of put together. So the next 5 days from the GFS, the next 5 days from the European. I think we clearly see this pattern evolving. It doesn't want to break, though, out through day 6 and 10, right? So we still see the jet stream wanting to favor this. It's in both the European and it is in the GFS. This is going to be some major accumulation of heat units out west. We're going to really rapidly increase the evaporation rates in California, something to be thinking about with irrigation efforts. And through the Canadian prairies, we do have a rebound in temperatures. But the East Coast is staying cool. And all the way out to day 10 through 15, both modeling centers are suggesting the cooler pattern hangs on with an anchor here in the Canadian Maritimes. So my big question is this going to break? I'm going to ask this and try to understand, is there a connection between the tropics and the subtropics? Now, I think the MJO has been playing second fiddle to so many other factors. It has stalled out. Remember a week ago we were saying, well, if the MJO could just do this and get over here, oh, it's going to break for warm very quickly. But unfortunately, what the MJO did was it stalled out here and is slowly moving back into null phase, as we can see in the forecast ensembles here. So that doesn't make much of a story from the Mount-Julian oscillation perspective to break the pattern at least through the next 15 days, which is what we just saw. So then I start looking at, is there anything going on in the Central Pacific near the surface, looking at El Nino and La Nina-like behavior. So if we go back to the beginning of April, we had converging winds right here in the Central Pacific. And then it flip-flopped over toward the last week or so where they diverged. And what I see longer term is much stronger easterly winds in the whole of the tropical Pacific near the surface, which would indicate La Nina-like behavior. Now, La Nina-like behavior tends to mean that the jet stream gets a bit more bunched up. And we've seen that, well, go back to the beginning of April, the Southern Oscillation Index bottomed out. That was when it was doing this, which was a big westerly wind burst right here. That's more El Nino-like behavior, but it has since recovered back up here. It's still negative, but this is a recovering Southern Oscillation Index value, which means the trade winds are returning back toward normal or even getting stronger as the pressure patterns adjust. So where I bring this discussion to a head comes into this. This is global atmospheric angular momentum. Now, how do you interpret this? It tells us the relationship between the tropics and the subtropics. For example, the MJO or El Nino, and then what the flow of the jet stream is doing. Now, when you look at it, we have had an MJO that has been on this pattern of high amplitude. Peak back here at the end of January, drops off in early February. Another peak at the end of February, beginning of March, drops off at the end of March. And then another peak right here at the beginning of April, and then it's dropped off here now. So the question is this going to do this again? Because it appears that in the forecast it should. Well, what does it mean if it goes back up to a peak? Well, I'll tell you this. Every time that it has bottomed out and dropped down like that, we've had a big increase in severe weather. See it right over here? Every time it's done that. Every time it's peaked, well, let's learn what those relationships show us. When it tends to peak out, we tend to get, with high atmospheric angular momentum, more ridging over the western United States and troughing over the east. So we have found cooler time periods here, 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 and we're going into one, especially over the east part of the United States there. So take a look at what the forecast is. By the time we begin May 1st, which is here, atmospheric angular momentum is going back up until then and supposed to reach a peak in this area. That is very, very much in alignment with what we're anticipating the jet stream doing this as we move forward. But do notice this, from the CFS model, it is supposed to reach a peak maybe by the 7th of May, and come back down here again. Which means if the models are going to be consistent, that means the pattern we're in and moving toward now could last to the beginning of May, the first week of May, and then go back over. And that's what I'm seeing. May 7th through 14th, we notice that at that time, well, above average temperatures not only out west, but they seem to be extending here across a region that right now is very, very cold into that area. And also at that time, we see drier conditions here, but a return toward wet in through there. This is again looking at May 7th through May 14th. What about May 14th out to the 21st? Well, during that time period, we see cooler weather here, corresponding with more cloud cover and moisture across the south, warmer conditions, and the models right now are saying, well, maybe near average precipitation, which we defined at the beginning of this video. What it seems like to me is the atmosphere is stuck in this oscillating mode characterized by the global wind anomalies. And therefore, when we look out longer term, wetter than average conditions over the month of May seem to be here, with drier weather in this area. That does not mean completely dry, just drier. Overall, the coolest weather tends to stay to our north, which we'd expect as we move over toward more summer regime. Warmth out west preferred, but not exactly staying cold in the central plains and even over toward the eastern Corn Belt after we get past the next 10 plus days with cooler weather in the east. So what is it mimicking? It seems to be mimicking what we've had so far this year. So this is just looking at the beginning of the year up till now in terms of precipitation anomalies. Do you see this? It tends to just want to keep that going, with drier conditions in the south central plains and in the north central plains encroaching on the western Corn Belt. So it seems to just be that the models are saying, keep what we've had. Do you see that with me? I'm trying to put this together, and that's the argument that I'm making. One thing I can say is it is not last year. This was May of 19. That was when we had split flow out west, deep trough that ran over a ridge, and we could not slow down the precipitation in this area at all. Record-setting rainfall. I'm at least thankful that I can say that it's different. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this forecast video. I look forward to talking again tomorrow. And until then, have a great rest of your day. Be careful in the southern United States with that severe weather's coming through. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow morning. Thank you.